Junko was watching Andromeda carefully, while they stood on the bridge of the Retribution, looking out across the colony fleet that was orbiting the dwarf star. Andromeda was being unusually quiet. Things like that worried Junko from time to time. The colony ship wasn't harmed? No, sir. A fighter pilot managed to launch extremely quickly and distract the Congo bombers before destroying the lead on her own. Cut off from the colony ship, the rest of their bombers hit freighters and support ships. While there were numerous casualties, no ships were lost. Reward the pilot. Yes, sir. I'm told her wing commander is already working on that. Unfortunately, we also lost 5 fighters and 2 pilots, plus 2 more pilots who I'm being told were drunk. The wing commander is on top of that, though. 5? Andromeda glanced over. Can we replace them? 3 easily enough. But not the other 2. And I have requests for more fighters to start training applicants from the colony fleet. And where do they propose we get these new fighters? Did we manage to get any of the Congo's Hercules? No, all their fighters and bombers were destroyed. Andromeda sighed and began to tap her chin while Junko watched. If I might suggest, sir, Chief Engineer Fry has been reporting success with her project. The Junkers? Andromeda looked over. You want us to make pilots fly around in fighters made from scrap? We don't have any other options if we want to increase our fighters. And as we progress, we'll need to scrap more Corsairs for parts. If we test them out now, perhaps we can take some Corsairs off the front line. Andromeda's shoulders slumped for a moment, which Junko almost never saw. Do it! She growled out before turning and walking away from the bridge. Junko tapped certain commands into her tablet before she quickly scurried to catch up with her boss. After adjusting her glasses for a moment, she glanced around the bridge. It seemed like spirits were fairly high. The Congo attack had been defeated. Several ships were captured, and they were back with the colony fleet. So why was Andromeda acting like this? It wasn't until they were out of the bridge and walking along the halls that Andromeda spoke again. How's salvaging the Congo ships coming along? Junko looked at her tablet while walking quickly. Most of the escorts have been stripped already. They're starting to work on the 2 cruisers. They're not one of the designs from the war. They're new. I saw the profile. Tell the salvage crews not to paint the hulls, knock the remains of the escorts into the star, and keep the cruisers functional. Assign techs and engineers to them, just enough to keep them moving and attach them to the colony fleet. I want them to study what the Congos have been doing, and no painting those hulls either. Junko was shocked. Andromeda had never hidden the remains of a battle before. What was going on? Yes, sir, Junko finally said as she tapped on her tablet to change the orders for the salvage crews. Where are we keeping the captured officers? Junko tapped on her tablet. Cookie has their top 4 isolated in surgery rooms as requested. That wasn't standard procedure either. What was going on inside her boss's head? Junko had gotten good at knowing ahead of time what the pirate wanted, but today she was rather off her game, it seemed. That or Andromeda was just showing she could never be fully understood. How many of their crew surrendered? Andromeda asked next. Junko examined her tablet. None from the escorts for some reason. The cruisers had about 5,000 each. Andromeda stopped then, and Junko had to quickly stop as well. When Andromeda turned to face her, Junko had to resist the urge to step away when confronted with her boss's angry face. 5,000? Did we slaughter the majority of their crew? I saw the size of those cruisers. We should have 3 times that many prisoners from each. At the very least! Junko shrank back from Andromeda's shouting before speaking up. The majority of the common crew did surrender, sir. Each cruiser is very heavily automated, it would appear. Andromeda seemed mollified by that answer, but still looked confused. Automated? Why? They've got billions of people. Why would they need to automate their ships? She glanced at Junko, who could only shrug. Well, let's get to the prisoners then. I have questions. Andromeda turned and began walking once more as Junko hurried to keep up. It took them roughly 10 minutes to get to a lift and take it down to the deck the private surgery rooms were located on. The guards outside snapped to attention as Andromeda approached, and the lifeguard took up positions in the hall. Only Titus followed Junko and Andromeda into the room. Cookie was standing next to a very nervous-looking Congo officer in a blue uniform who was strapped to the operating table. I've got him all set up for you, boss. The captains of both vessels had cyanide pills they took rather than get captured. This is the highest-ranking officer we were able to get. "You won't get me to talk," the officer said quickly. "You're already talking, idiot," Andromeda countered with a sigh. As she approached the bound prisoner, she looked him over. "That's not a patch I've seen before. Nuntios verbi. Junko?" Rough translation would be messengers of the word. Sir, Junko had studied some Latin at the academy. And what word would that be? The word of the conglomerate? Join us and we'll make everyone equal? Oppose us and we'll force you to become like us anyway? Andromeda asked, but the officer was quiet. Are you nervous? You really should be. I mean, your commanding officer committed suicide rather than be taken alive. Isn't that a bad sign for what will happen to you? Junko could see the man was starting to sweat. My ID number is... Before he could go any further, Andromeda pushed her finger against the man's side, in against his ribs, it looked like. What? If you try to give me your ID number again, I'm going to break your rib. If you give me some stupid fucking line about the rules and regulations regarding prisoners, I'm going to break your rib. If you piss me off, I'm going to break your rib. What was your strike force doing out here? The officer was quiet. Andromeda pushed hard then, and with the increased strength of the power armor she wore, it only took a moment before the man screamed in pain, and Junko thought she heard a faint snap. Fuck you! We were searching for Xeno nations. This is a diplomatic fleet you attacked, you fucking monster! We found you on accident. I'm the monster? Your fighters and bombers were headed straight towards the colony ship, which, as everyone knows, is filled with civilians and refugees who don't want to live in your fucking conglomerate. I'm the monster? She pushed higher up the man's ribs and he screamed out again, gasping for air. Captain Green said it was the only way to hurt you. I didn't give the orders, he gasped out. You thought I was gone and decided to try and take on a defenseless civilian fleet to hurt me? Why is it that I'm always the bad guy, huh? You fuckwads have killed billions more than I ever will, and you do it all in the name of progress. At least when I show up to ruin the day, it's not while riding a high horse. Andromeda muttered, obviously angry. Fuck you! The officer gasped out. Why are the cruisers automated? To reduce supply needs? Yes, the officer replied, but when Andromeda started to push on his next rib, he quickly gasped. No! She released the pressure and he spoke. We selected crews who were exceptionally loyal to the cause. Believers, people without families, or at least very few relatives. Those who would die for the conglomerate rather than serve you. So how come all the sailors surrendered? She countered. The officer gulped for a moment, but as she began to press on his rib again, he spoke. We know your offer. We never tell the general populace, but we're aware you give sailors a choice. Once it was clear the ships were lost, they surrendered to save their lives. They'll reject your offer of joining your fucking pirate fleet, and then be returned to the Navy when they get picked up from whatever planet you drop them on. Andromeda growled out. Well, we still have the diplomats. They signed their lives away. If captured, their families won't be told. They'll simply be reported as lost. You'll get nothing from us as prisoners! Andromeda leaned back then and nodded at Cookie. You know what information to dig for. I'll leave you to it. She turned and began to walk out of the room while Cookie stepped up to the officer. Are you left-handed or right-handed? I forgot to ask earlier. Junko always felt a shiver down her spine when she saw Cookie smile like that and calmly ask that question when she knew what would follow. Well, why does that matter? The officer asked, obviously worried. Oh, I suppose you're right. Before we're done, you won't have any fingernails left regardless. Junko was already turning to follow Andromeda before she would have to see Cookie do anything, but the officer's screaming made it obvious what had begun. You didn't ask me anything. Oh, I know, I find it's better that way for the first few minutes. Lets me focus. The doors closed behind Junko once she was out of the room, and thankfully she couldn't hear any more screaming behind her. Junko, is there any sign that he was telling the truth about the crew? Junko checked her tablet, tapping on it as she sifted through various reports. The captured sailors are telling their guards not to bother with a speech and to drop them off on the nearest planet. They seem to have assigned a team of spokespeople to negotiate for them. Andromeda sighed. So that's it. Automate their ships and use crews as small as possible so they can use only idiots stupid enough to believe all that Congo propaganda bullshit. She rubbed her hand across her mouth for a moment. Have them move to an exterior cargo bay. We'll drop them off on the nearest planet, all right. But sir, they're just sailors. You always said... Andromeda turned on Junko, and this time she did take a nervous step back. I know what I've said, Junko, but this isn't the usual sort of situation, is it? They tried to destroy the colony ship. You think I'm letting that slide? We're still at war with the Congos. As much as they like to claim it's over and they won, that's simply not the case. As long as I breathe. As long as this fleet exists. The war is not over. Junko nodded quickly to show her agreement. Then Andromeda sighed and continued. We'll wait until we're in transit ahead of the colony fleet. They won't see the bodies get dumped into the nebula. And don't worry, Junko, I'll press the button myself. With all the people dead by my orders, what's another 10,000? Don't bother sending food or cots into the cargo bay either to make them think we're going to do what we always do. Just tell them the speech is being postponed until I talk to their spokespeople. Junko looked back at her table and tapped on it as she began to issue the orders and started to walk with Andromeda. Another 5 minutes had passed before she realized they were standing in the art gallery that Andromeda had been trying to turn into a throne room of sorts. She didn't examine the art, though. She walked over to her father in the corner, standing before the red light on the side of the black box. Leave. I want to be alone with my father. Junko looked around for a moment and was about to ask what she should do instead, but thought better of it when she saw the look in Andromeda's eyes. Instead, she turned and walked out of the back with Titus and 2 of the other lifeguard. They set up on either side of the door, clearly intending to stand watch for however long it took Andromeda to say her piece with her father. Once they were outside the room, Junko thought over what to do next. Andromeda might be 5 minutes, she might be an hour. Ah, Captain Titus, do you mind if I talk to you in private? The massive soldier looked down at her for a moment, seeming a little surprised by the request. Then he shrugged and nodded, motioning for Junko to follow behind him. He walked around the corner from the art gallery with her out of earshot of the other lifeguard. She had hoped for a more private location but figured this would have to do. Do you ever think about taking up Andromeda on her offer? What offer would that be? He asked, arching an eyebrow. For a servant. Junko began chewing on her lower lip nervously. She'd promised Cassis to help out his niece, but she was pretty nervous about trying to make that happen. And the surprised look on Titus's face made her fear she wasn't selling it well. You know, like, to help you get dressed or keep your room clean and stuff. I'm sure it would be helpful. And if you didn't want people to think you had other reasons, you could always get a guy's servant, right? If I wanted people to think I didn't have a servant for other reasons. He emphasized the words to make it clear he knew what she was referring to, and also embarrass her a bit. I'd get a girl servant. Junko blinked at that for a moment. What? Oh, I had no idea. Sorry. She was rather surprised that over the last few years of being Andromeda's assistant, she didn't know that about Titus. It doesn't come up much, he replied calmly. It's not as though I start every sentence with I'm gay, or that I go around having relationships with other men in front of you. I tend to keep my personal life personal. Junko blushed a little as she tried to rethink her words, but Titus didn't give her time. What's this about? You don't strike me as the sort to want someone to dress you, and I've seen your room junk. It's very clean. On the other side of things, I'm fairly sure you get enough of the other reasons when Andromeda demands it of you. So, why are we talking about servants? Junko squirmed a little for a moment as she tried to think up a good reason, but in the end she just sighed. The Xeno Captain Cassis, one of the noble prisoners, is his niece. He fears that his family will be unable to pay whatever we demand when compared to the wealth of the other families we can demand ransom from. I was thinking, I could ask for her as a servant and keep her safe. Safe from what? Their greatest threat between now and the payment of their ransom is boredom. Aside from Cassis and that white one Andromeda claimed for her bedroom, of course. Though I'm sure you're aware of that. Junko sighed a bit at his understatement. But what will happen if they can't pay the ransom? I promised him I'd help out his niece. You can help her by telling Andromeda that her family can't pay as much. If she's related to the captain, she needs to know. Junko frowned. That was what she had mostly wanted Andromeda not to know. She couldn't tell if her boss would treat that girl worse or better due to the relationship with Cassis. Well, now Titus knew, and by extension Andromeda would soon also know. I'll talk to her about it. Junko finally promised now that she realized she'd backed herself into a corner over the matter. After also having promised Cassis, she wasn't entirely sure how to keep both promises at the same time. Needing to move on to something else and let her brain wander, she just nodded to Titus and walked towards the private area of the ship that contained Andromeda's suite. The guards at the checkpoint didn't bother IDing or searching her for obvious reasons, and she began to look for Cassis. After briefly checking her tablet, she headed towards Andromeda's suite itself. Crow, the stone-faced rock Xeno, was standing guard outside, but he didn't stop her from entering. In the main common area inside, she found the two Desvians. Cassis was wearing a simple technician's jumpsuit, instead of the fancy uniform he'd been wearing when he was first brought aboard. He was sitting on a chair reading a tablet that Junko had given him. Meanwhile, the female Desvian, who was named Loretta, was in a simple blue dress. To Junko's surprise, the girl had the music going, some sort of synthy trip-hop song, and was dancing around to the sounds. After her initial shock the first night, the girl seemed to have settled in very quickly. The new musical sounds that Andromeda had at her disposal were a wealth of entertainment for the girl. It seemed that Xeno or human wealthy children of college age had similar attitudes. She would have fit right in among the preppy rich kids that Junko had despised at the academy. Cassis, Junko said as she approached. They'd spoken after that first night. They had both agreed, like she had suggested, to not let anything be taken personally, and kept a friendly relationship, which Junko was glad for. The ordeal probably helped him understand that Junko really was a bit of a prisoner herself. Not quite to his extent, but sort of. Thank the Paragons, the Xeno said and tossed his tablet aside onto the couch, standing up. Get me out of here. This music is bizarre and hurts my ears, and she's taken some of those pink pills your boss gave her, so she'll go insane at any moment. He huffed, crossing his arms as he faced Junko. The ecstasy? She looked over at Loretta, who was smiling wide, eyes closed. The last time she'd taken the drug, she'd spent hours just touching things and rubbing against them. Harmless, really, but Cassis didn't approve when the girl had wanted to squeeze his face and mess with his hair. You do know you're free to go at any time, right? From this room, I mean. You can explore this area of the ship freely. You said that, but that stone creature outside is standing guard. Just walk past him. Does he stop you? Junko asked, eyebrows arched. Cassis shifted a little. I suppose I never tried it. I just saw him and assumed. If you like, I can escort you to another room, or the observatory if you'd like to see the colony fleet. She wanted to see the Xeno's impression of the fleet. See if she could get information about his own people through the observations. He seemed to get guarded and uncomfortable around Andromeda, so Junko hoped to keep him a bit more open around her. Where is this observatory? He asked and looked around. Junko motioned for him to follow her and walked past the common area and the kitchen to the end of a small hall to a closed door. This door's been locked since I got here, you know. Junko looked back at Cassis and then pressed the green button on the wall next to the door. As the door slid open, she watched the Cassis's face. She was trying to get better at reading Desvions, and if she was right about him opening his mouth and rubbing the side of his muzzle, that was a sign of disbelief. All doors are locked if you don't try to open them, she said simply, and then stepped through. Across the wall from the door was a massive viewport looking out over the bow of the ship. The dwarf star was ahead of them, and the colony fleet arranged before them. Once they were both inside, the door behind them closed, so the light from the other rooms didn't seep in. This suite is near the bow of the ship? Cassis asked. No, this is just a screen. This area is in the heart of the ship to be best protected. She tapped on her tablet and let the screen flicker, showing the view from various angles around the ship before returning to the first image. A screen? How did you make one so massive? Our computer screens are small and display nothing more than basic information. Nothing like this. He was clearly impressed while Junko was just surprised. They didn't have basic display technology like this? That ship. He pointed out at the colony ship. What is that? Another massive warship like this? It looks strange. Lots of bulbs. That's a colony ship. It's roughly the same length as the Retribution, 8 miles long. but much fatter. Cassis turned on her, clearly shocked. Both that vessel and this are 8 miles long? I first figured this ship was twice the largest battleship in the kingdom, but later figured it must have been fear to make me think that. But what you're saying is I was right. What kind of crews do they have, in terms of size? About 125,000. Then 20,000 gunners and loaders. That is if it were fully manned. Right now, we've got about 95,000 sailors and 20,000 gunners. Hopefully your men will increase our number of sailors. But it's more likely the bulk of them will join the 50,000 combat forces we have spread between this ship and the Itzpapalotl. No wonder you had little trouble taking over my ship, Cassis muttered. 50,000? Our ship-to-ship battles have very rarely involved boarding actions. And yet you make it a priority. You're going to sweep through the sector like a plague. How do you feed all of them? That colony ship, Junko nodded. It's made to house and feed 1 million citizens. Right now it only houses half that. The rest of the food is spread around to the other ships and crews. It produces several hundred tons of algae and protein paste for consumption every day, though the officers get more meats and fruits we have in storage. It also produces the fleet's rum rations, which gets turned into grog with the addition of waters and juices to stretch our supply. We've been running in the nebula for a few months now, and are running very low on fresh supplies. The colony can't grow enough fresh fruits and veggies to prevent scurvy on its own, and protein paste can get boring without some real meat to enhance it now and then. Cassis slowly shook his head as he looked out across the colony fleet. Then he stopped and looked back. Wait, 500,000 people live on that ship? Junko nodded. And you brought them through the nebula and no one went mad? Well, a few people, but the majority are more bored than anything. She shrugged and watched him as he seemed thoughtful over the notion. We have centuries of horror stories from expeditions into the nebula, people going mad and turning on one another, ghost ships filled with the dead, all manner of thing. But you seem to be immune from this. Perhaps we're already mad, Junko ventured, and Cassis laughed for a moment. One of the first things Andromeda is going to want to do as we venture into Desvian territory is get fresh supplies. I don't need to know now, but think about what systems can spare large quantities of food and not starve. She's going to ask you about that soon enough. Where is she, anyway? The Baroness. He scowled a little as he used the word. She's talking with her father. Ah, a conversation ritual with the dead. This is something both our species share. Junko was about to correct him, but then he pointed to the first white Congo cruiser being brought out of the nebula. Is that one of the enemy who attacked your civilians? Yes. They are called the conglomerate. There's a term we have for them that probably doesn't make sense in translation. Congos. She could see him frown as she said that. In our language, that's what the word conglomerate shortens to. They represent the government of 95% of humanity. And the other 5%? He asked, and waved at the colony fleet. No, Junko said with a soft laugh. We're less than 1 million strong altogether. Impressive for a fleet, not impressive for a planet. The other 5% are hidden worlds beyond the reach of the conglomerate. Those who would rather live in the dangerous unknown than be tied to the rules of that government. Mostly those who used to be Confederates. Confederates? Cassis asked. Ah, the last nation to fall in the conglomerate's conquest of all humanity. The nation that built this warship, that colony ship, and most of the ships in this fleet. The majority of the crews are ex-Confederates, though many of them would dispute that they are still Confederates and will rebuild their home as soon as Andromeda can find them a suitable planet. Many of them? Cassis had caught that and emphasized the word them. I was born near the core worlds. Conglomerate territory, Junko replied, and then headed off the next question. I was attached to a newly appointed governor and sent out to a system that had once belonged to the Confederates. I never made it. The ship was seized, and Andromeda had need of a good executive assistant. So now I organize much of the day-to-day logistics of the fleet and serve her faithfully. But would you have done so if she didn't make you? Junko stared at the Xeno for several seconds, unsure how to respond. A question that can't be answered because now you serve, and that's simply all you can say? She nodded then, glad he'd more or less answered the question for himself. At least the job is interesting, she added with a somewhat forced smile. So then, what is your boss's goal in all of this? We are not the conglomerate. Why move into our territory? Because they want her dead. They want this whole fleet dead. They were trying to attack that unarmed colony ship to destroy our food supply. A ship they're very well aware is filled with civilians and refugees who simply don't want to live in their nation. That's against the very rules they tried to enforce at the start of the war. She sighed. I might have been born a Congo, but I lost my faith in their system when I realized there is no choice behind it. You accept their rules or you die. Andromeda is a pirate and a murderer, but she gives people a choice. Mostly, she added. That didn't fully answer my question, Cassis replied. All right. Junko nodded before continuing. She wants to establish a home somewhere in this system, thinking that it will be far enough from the home of the Congo that they will hesitate to chase this far, especially if she makes allies. Cassis laughed at that. Allies? Who is going to ally themselves with a pirate? The kingdom whose crown prince is held hostage? Junko retorted and watched Cassis's smile fade very quickly. Or your enemies who would like that hostage for themselves. Or perhaps those warlike insects you mentioned before. The Camexius! Cassis exclaimed. They were a scourge on our system centuries ago. She would doom this fleet by unleashing them. They seek no allies, but only slaves. Well, maybe their centuries of isolation has changed them, Junko asked and shrugged. She's still going to try. Nothing is more important to her than finding her people a home. Once we have a secure home, she hopes to liberate those trapped in Congo territory and bring them back. To give people a choice between slavery and freedom. That's how she sees it at any rate. Cassis looked like he wanted to say something, but he held off after a moment and simply nodded, rubbing his chin as he did. I'd like to learn more about this conglomerate and confederacy and their war. Apparently the father of Andromeda made quite the impact in those events. Yes, very much so. Her life has been intertwined with the conflict from the very beginning. Junko nodded. I can show you the museum she mentioned when first showing you this place. I don't know much about the military tactics. You'd want to talk to someone like Captain Stahl about that sort of thing. Which one is he? Was he the dirty human who showed up for the briefing where Andromeda killed that disgusting monster? Junko opened her mouth and then closed it as she tried to piece together what Cassis was talking about. She figured he meant when Andromeda killed Bloodaxe's son. But dirty human? What do you mean by dirty? He wore a white uniform, but his face was covered in dirt and oil and such. So much, in fact, it all looked quite dark. Junko suddenly realized Cassis wasn't aware of the differences in human skin color. He isn't dirty. That's the color of his flesh. What? Cassis seemed shocked. Why? How? You are a little different color from the others, but he's a totally different shade. And you have different fur colors than Loretta. Why does that seem so strange? She asked, confused about his confusion. Yes, but beneath it our flesh is the same color. I think... Why does his flesh have such a different color to it? Ah, millions of years ago on our home world it was protection from the harsh rays of our sun, I believe. He came from an area with more sun than that of Andromeda and her ancestors. Junko shrugged. Why is your fur different color? And don't say heritage. I mean, why evolve different colors? Cassis paused and thought it over. Certain fur colors did better in certain areas of our homeworld. So then the same applies for us. But we have flesh instead of fur. She shrugged once more. Either way, don't call him dirty. He will not respond well to that. Noted, Cassis muttered as he seemed to be contemplating the nature of their differences between species. So, would he be willing to share with me the history of that war? I'll ask him. I'm sure he would be happy to. She was anything but sure about that. She could never tell if Stahl relished discussing the war and his role in it, or if he hated reliving his past. Either way, she would ask. What about the differences in their governments? At least you can tell me what brought them to blows? I can't really get a sense of how Andromeda plans to rule. She has a rank of nobility, but she just chose it for herself, apparently, which I say makes no sense. She didn't proclaim herself queen either. Neither nation had nobility, if that's what you're asking. She was as close as it got since her father was the most important and famous admiral of the Confederacy. But he wasn't nobility either, simply a great military commander, one of the greatest, in fact. Junko wasn't saying that for fear of Andromeda either. He really was one of the greatest of all time. No, both nations were democracies. As she said that, she realized the word hadn't translated. They were what? He seemed confused. But she knew he'd used that word before, hadn't he? Ah, the rulers are elected from the people. A republic? He asked, and she nodded. Truthfully, the word I used means something similar. I am at a loss for the difference between the two. I think a republic chooses people who then vote, but a democracy is where the people vote on everything. But I'll try and explain it better when I understand the differences in our languages better, she promised. So then, if they had similar governments, what was the issue? He was still confused, and Junko had to take her time to process it in her head. Choice. Junko jumped as she was interrupted and looked back to see Andromeda. She had been so quiet entering the room, Junko hadn't heard her. That's the issue. The conglomerate, like their name implies, wants everything joined together as one. But they don't want them being different. Every planet, every system, every citizen has to deal with the same laws, the same systems. No differences. So long as more than half the people vote for a law, all must obey it. This is an issue? Cassis asked. Does your king set different taxes for certain systems? Are there local laws that change between planets? Andromeda asked. Ah, now I see what you mean. They didn't allow this? They did not, Andromeda confirmed. I personally believe that there are questions that have no right or wrong answer. Two people might both live in harmony while believing different things. They disagree on some things and live in different areas and try to make laws to reflect their beliefs. Neither one is wrong. They both just approach things differently. As far as the Congos are concerned, one of them is indeed wrong. The Confederacy instead wanted a central government to protect the people, and then allowed systems and planets to set their own laws. But that was the only basis for the war? Cassis asked, seeming still confused. Those two notions it seems to me like they can live together without issue. Ah, but that's the issue. The Confederacy was happy to live apart from the Congos. Many people left their territory for the far reaches of space, including Castor, the home of the Confederacy. My home as a child. We had many brilliant minds and hard-working entrepreneurs move to our systems to live in places they liked more. Want a planet that has a strong sense of community and support? Higher taxes but more programs for the poor. There's several to choose from. Want to live someplace with fewer taxes but no safety net? There's a place for that. Somewhere that doesn't allow guns? Or a place where everyone has a weapon? You could choose. So long as the regional laws didn't break a few big ones that all systems in the Confederacy agreed to, then that's fine. And your enemy wasn't happy with this? Cassis asked. No. Andromeda walked forward, Cassis and Junko looking out over the colony fleet. They'd already conquered several other nations in their unification wars. They're greedy, you see. To them, it's not enough for their system to rule almost everyone. They want everyone. All humans. All systems. Sooner or later, they'll come for your kingdom, too. In time, they decided to move against the Confederacy. Bring the so-called deviants under heel. Cassis frowned at that, and she quickly changed her wording. Under control. So, both nations must have been close in size, then. No, Andromeda laughed. Not even close. They had 4 times the size, 5 times the population, and triple the resources. From the very beginning, most of the people in power in the Confederacy knew they were going to lose. And in the end, the war ended up costing the lives of several 100 million people on both sides. If you count people who died later on, then I'd say 2 billion roughly in total. Cassis stood in shock, mouth hanging open. Billions? He finally gasped. Why would you fight then? If they had won before the war began, why fight? Because the only way to know we would lose was to fight the war for real and find out. Ironically, the reason the war took so many lives was because how close we came to winning it. Thanks to my father, of course. But a single commander, even that gifted, is still fighting an uphill battle when his nation is so hopelessly outmatched, and our opponent was so intent on victory at all costs. Junko noticed the sad look in her boss's eyes. She didn't get like this often. Then she seemed to shake it. But enough about all that sad shit. Come on, I have questions about your kingdom and the systems we'll be heading into. She wrapped an arm around Cassis's shoulder, then she loosened her grip when he heard him yelp. Power armor. Right, sorry about that. Junko, did you make sure the new prisoners were settled down in their new home? When Andromeda looked over at Junko, she gulped and checked her tablet. Yes, sir, they're being moved as we speak. No complaints since you've made it clear you wish to speak with their negotiators. Excellent. Now then, let's go talk to some people and maybe I'll take you over to the colony ship. Let you get an idea what a human city is like. Take you for a night on the town! Won't that be fun? She smiled wide as she pulled Cassis out of the room, and Junko had to sigh as she looked at her tablet. She watched her reports as the guards escorted the 10,000 Congo sailors to an outer cargo bay that would eventually be vented into the void. Her boss talked about having fun, while Junko had their imminent deaths weighing heavily on her conscience. She needed a drink.